For 11 years I lived in a family that was never mine. Later, I received a mysterious letter. My name is Nolan Greaves. I'm 32 now, but this story begins when I was 16, the day I discovered that the people raising me weren't who I thought they were. We lived in a faded white house on Alder Lane, on the edge of a town so ordinary it might as well have been painted in grayscale. Haralton. Population under 2,000. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, but not everyone was known. My father, Chester Greaves, worked at the lumber yard, a man with strong hands and an even stronger silence. He could fix a leaking pipe or split firewood with surgical precision, but he rarely spoke more than he had to. My mother, Ruth, kept the house. She made breakfasts with military regularity: 2 eggs, toast, a half slice of bacon for balance. She hummed old gospel tunes while scrubbing dishes like she was trying to erase the sins of the town. From the outside, we were picture perfect, modest, hardworking, stable. But the silence in our home wasn't peace. It was tension, tight as a tripwire. There were no hugs, no affection. Praise was rare. Secrets were common. But like most children, I didn't question the rules of my little world. I just lived in them. Until the letter came. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had soccer practice, and I came home late to find Mom in the kitchen, clutching an envelope. Her hands shook, and when she saw me, she quickly stuffed it into the junk drawer, mumbling something about wrong address. But I'd seen my name on it, to Nolan Greaves, care of Ruth and Chester Greaves. That night, I waited until they were asleep and went downstairs. The envelope was still there, buried under expired coupons and old keys. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded 3 times. Nolan. You don't know me, but I'm your uncle, your real uncle. Your mother and father aren't who they say they are. There's more to your past than you've been told. I can't explain it all in a letter. Please, call me Elijah T. It was signed with a number and a postmark from a town I'd never heard of, Latham Creek, Missouri. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if it was a joke. But something in my gut told me it wasn't. I started watching my parents more closely after that, how they looked at me when they thought I wasn't looking. How they sometimes whispered late at night. I remembered fragments of early childhood that had never made sense: strange men visiting once a year, a box of photographs my mother burned in the fire pit one summer evening. 2 days later, I called the number. A man answered on the 3rd ring. Hello? Is this Elijah? I asked. There was a pause. Who is this? It's Nolan. You sent me a letter. The line went quiet for a second, then a deep breath. God, you sound like him, you sound just like Jacob. Who's Jacob? Another pause. Your father. Your real father. My knees went weak. I sat down on the floor of the garage, next to a shelf of old paint cans and rusted tools. I don't remember everything he said. It felt like the floor had given out beneath me. But I remember this. Your father died when you were 5. Car accident. Your mother too. My brother and his wife. Ruth and Chester weren't supposed to raise you. They were just guardians, temporary, until I could get custody. But they moved. They cut off contact. And I couldn't find you again. I hung up. I didn't want to believe it. I spent the next week digging through the house, drawers, closets, boxes in the attic. Eventually, I found it, a birth certificate. Mine. But the names listed under parents weren't Chester and Ruth. They were Jacob Timothy Ralston and Anne Marie Ralston. The confrontation that followed still burns in my mind like a scar. They were at the kitchen table. I walked in, holding the certificate in one hand and the letter in the other. Who am I? I asked. Ruth's face crumpled in an instant, but Chester's stayed stone still. He looked down at the table, jaw clenched. You're our son, Ruth said, but her voice cracked like thin ice. No, I said. I'm not. You lied. You kept me from my family. Why? They didn't have a good answer. They tried to say it was to protect me. That Elijah had problems. That they had done what was best. But their eyes betrayed them. It wasn't protection. It was possession. They had taken me. Hidden me. Raised me in silence and guilt and called it love. That night, I packed a bag and walked 5 miles to the bus station. I used the little money I had to buy a ticket to Latham Creek. I didn't know if I'd be welcome there. I didn't know what I'd find. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the truth. The bus to Latham Creek wasn't direct. I had to transfer twice, once in Carrollton and again in Springfield. Each station smelled like tired dreams and old cigarettes. The people around me were shadows, blurry figures with their own stories. Mine sat heavy in my backpack, tucked between a flannel shirt and a nearly empty wallet. The sun was rising when I arrived. Latham Creek wasn't much bigger than Harrelton, but it felt different, less boxed in. The roads curved like they weren't in a rush to get anywhere. The houses were older but alive, with front porches that told stories and yards scattered with kids' toys. The air smelled like wet cedar and coffee. Elijah met me at the station. I recognized him before he spoke. He had my father's eyes. Not in some poetic sense, but exactly. Same amber-green hue, same quiet fire. He was taller than I imagined, with a kind of weathered strength you don't get from the gym. He wore a brown corduroy jacket and a cap with the logo of some local farm co-op. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You got taller," he said with a soft smile. "I guess," I said. "I'm glad you came." His voice cracked a little. He didn't try to hug me. He just took my bag and led me to his truck, an old Chevy with a cracked windshield. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was careful, like two people trying not to spill anything delicate. We didn't talk much on the drive. I watched the pine trees roll by, wondering how my life might have looked if I'd grown up here instead. Would I have played baseball on the weekends? Had birthday parties with cousins? Known what it meant to be wanted, not just raised? Elijah's house sat on the edge of a small lake. 2 stories, peeling paint, a crooked mailbox. He unlocked the door like it was second nature and gestured for me to follow. "Your room's upstairs. It was your dad's when we were kids. Still got his old posters on the walls. Figured I'd leave them up." The room smelled like cedar and dust. The bed was neatly made, the sheets crisp and new. One wall was lined with vintage rock band posters, Fleetwood Mac, CCR, Queen. A small desk held a lamp and a framed picture of 2 young boys with gap-toothed grins and matching baseball caps. "That's us," Elijah said from behind me. "Me and your dad. That summer before high school." I nodded, my throat tightening. I didn't know what to say. There were too many things to say. He let me settle in before we sat down for dinner, chili and cornbread, no small talk. Just the sound of spoons and rain beginning to tap the windows. "I want to tell you everything," Elijah said finally, pushing his bowl aside. "And I will. But I need to ask you something first." I looked up. "Do you want to know the whole truth? Even the parts that might hurt?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "All right. Then here it is." He told me about my parents, Jacob and Ann. They'd met in college, fallen in love hard and fast. They were artists, idealists, people who believed in community and freedom. But they didn't come from that. My father had left Harrelton to escape a legacy of bitterness. Ruth was his sister. Chester was a friend who turned into something colder. They didn't like Ann, Elijah said. Thought she was too soft, too open. Thought she'd take Jacob away forever. When my parents died in that accident and icy road, a sharp turn, Elijah had tried to claim me. He was already raising a family, had a home, a plan. But Ruth and Chester had legal guardianship on paper, signed during a moment of panic when I was born prematurely and needed weeks of hospital care. "They used it to keep you," he said. Then they disappeared. Changed phone numbers. Moved to a different county. I didn't have the money to fight it. I tried for years. But they made sure you never knew. I sat there, silent. My spoon had stopped halfway to my mouth. "Why didn't you come find me sooner?" I finally asked. "I tried," he said, eyes shining. "But I didn't want to show up angry and ruin whatever world you thought you had. I waited until I had something to offer. Until I could be steady. I never stopped looking, though. The moment I found an address, I wrote you." That night, I lay in Jacob's old room, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the years I'd spent in a house where love was a ration thing. Where questions were discouraged. Where I learned to accept silence as safety. I didn't cry. Not yet. There was a numbness that hadn't thawed. But something had shifted. A door cracked open. The next morning, I found Elijah in the shed, repairing a broken step stool. He looked up, smiled faintly. Want to learn how to use a lathe? He asked. I nodded. We didn't talk about the past that day. We worked side by side, making something out of nothing. And for the first time, I felt the faint stirrings of home. By the second week, I began to understand something that still unsettles me: not all lies are spoken. Some are woven into routines, baked into Sunday dinners, hidden behind phrases like "it's for your own good." The silence of my childhood was not neglect, it was strategy. A way of keeping the truth just out of reach, tucked beneath obligation and guilt. Elijah wasn't a replacement for Ruth and Chester. He never tried to be. What he gave me was something quieter, more profound: clarity. We spent most days fixing things: his truck, a sagging porch, broken fences. He ran a small repair business in town and had loyal customers who paid what they could. People respected him. Not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. I saw how he treated others, how they greeted him like an old friend. It made me realize how little I knew about trust. About the space it creates. One afternoon, while organizing old boxes in his attic, I found a shoebox labeled Nolan, birth 25. Inside were photos I had never seen before. Me as a baby, cradled in my mother's arms, a park picnic, my father helping me walk along a garden path. There was a birthday card from my dad, signed "To my best boy, can't wait to see you grow tall and kind." His handwriting was neat, the ink slightly faded. I brought the box downstairs. "You kept these?" I asked. Elijah was cleaning a wrench, but paused. "Every last one they sent. I made copies when I could. Thought, maybe one day you'd want them." I sat on the floor and looked through each picture, my heart catching at every smile, every touch. These weren't perfect parents, but they were real. They had loved me. And I had been taken from them by people who told me bedtime prayers and taught me how to tie my shoes. That night, I called Ruth. She answered on the third ring. "Nolan?" Her voice was tight. "I know everything," I said. There was a long pause. "Then you know why we did it?" "No," I replied. "I really don't." "You were 5. Elijah wasn't ready. You lied," I cut in. "You let me believe you were my parents. You burned photos, you hid letters, you told me nothing." "That's not protection. That's theft. You don't understand. Stop saying that. You didn't do it for me. You did it for yourselves." Her voice broke then. "We loved you. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. You loved the idea of me. But you never loved me enough to let me have the truth." I hung up. That conversation didn't bring closure. Not then. It tore something open. But that tearing let the light in. Later that week, Elijah took me to the town's archives. We dug through old microfiche, birth records, obituaries. I saw the accident report for the first time. My parents had died instantly, head-on collision with a semi during a snowstorm. Their car had skidded on black ice. No foul play. Just tragedy. But what happened after was where the betrayal began. The court documents were sobering. Ruth and Chester had filed for emergency guardianship the day after the funeral. Claimed Elijah was unstable, unmarried, and financially unsuitable. I read the judge's notes. He'd ruled in the best interest of the child, influenced by Ruth's profession, a former nurse, and Chester's clean record. No mention of Elijah's actual petition, filed 2 weeks later. No mention of his background check, his letters of reference. Nothing. "They buried me," I said aloud in the county clerk's office. Elijah put a hand on my shoulder. "They did." I thought I might feel rage. But what I felt was deeper, grief. For the boy I had been. The boy who had looked up to them. The boy who never asked why, because he thought he was already being told the truth. On the drive home, Elijah said something I never forgot. "They stole your story, Nolan. But they didn't get to write the ending." That night, I started a letter, not to Ruth or Chester, but to myself. To the version of me that still believed in their bedtime stories. I told him it was okay to let go. That he wasn't broken. That what had happened wasn't his fault. And then I told him the most important part, that he was found. And that was the beginning of everything. By the 3rd month in Latham Creek, I no longer felt like a guest. I learned how to stain wood, how to repair a leaky roof, how to talk to people without shrinking. I also learned that healing doesn't come like a storm, it comes like a slow thaw. And every day, a little more of me surfaced. But some days still stung. Like the day I found the letter from Chester. It had no return address. Just a short note, written in careful cursive. Nolan. I don't expect forgiveness. I only ask that you remember who changed your diapers, taught you to fish, and paid for your shoes when times were hard. We may have made mistakes, but we were there. Chester Greaves. Elijah read it over my shoulder, then placed it on the counter without a word. I stared at it for a long time, unsure what to feel. Guilt? Anger? Some distorted sense of gratitude? They're not wrong, I said after a while. They were there. Elijah nodded slowly. Being there isn't the same as doing right by someone. He didn't press me to throw it away. And I didn't. I placed it in the box with my childhood photos. A part of the story, but no longer the whole. Later that week, Elijah and I went to visit my parents' graves. I hadn't been since I was 5. The cemetery was quiet, just past the edge of town, with rows of moss-covered stones and a few wind chimes hanging in old oaks. Their graves were side by side, modest headstones with simple inscriptions. Jacob T. Ralston, 1969 to 2003. He lived with an open heart. And M. Ralston, 1971 to 2003. Her hands were always kind. I stood there for a long time, feeling like an intruder in my own story. I had no memories of their voices, no real recollection of their faces beyond what the photographs gave me. And yet I felt something fierce pulling inside me, some mix of longing and belonging. I don't know what I'm supposed to say, I admitted. You don't have to say anything, Elijah replied. They knew you loved them. I knelt down, touched the cold granite, and whispered anyway. I'm sorry it took so long. That night, I asked Elijah if he'd ever thought of going to court again, filing something to have guardianship formally corrected, maybe even changing my legal name. He just looked at me with that quiet calm he always carried. You can, he said. But legal documents don't fix what's already broken. They don't give back what was taken. What does? He hesitated. Living well. That's what gives you justice. You live so full, so honestly, that every lie they told you loses its power. Those words stayed with me. I started writing again, short stories, journal entries, fragments of memory. I began working part-time at the repair shop and volunteering with a local youth program. I met people who didn't know my past, and I got to decide how much of it I told them. But not everything could stay buried forever. One afternoon, while cleaning out the barn on Elijah's property, I found an old file box with my name on it. Inside were printouts, emails, legal briefs, custody forms. Records of Elijah's fight to find me. Hundreds of pages. I sat down on the floor, tears rising, as I flipped through them. Some had been printed on fax paper, the ink fading. Others were recent. Letters never sent. One email draft stopped me cold. Dear Nolan. If this ever reaches you, please know you were never forgotten. I thought of you every day. I kept your room ready. I made your favorite meals on your birthday even though I didn't know what you still liked. I'm not trying to replace what you lost. I'm just hoping I can be a part of what you become. He never sent it. Later that night, I brought the box into the living room. Elijah looked surprised when I placed it in front of him. You never gave up, I said. He smiled, quietly. I couldn't. I didn't tell him then, but that was the moment I decided I was going to confront Ruth and Chester. Not with vengeance. Not to make them suffer. But because the only way to truly claim your story is to face the people who tried to rewrite it. I called and asked to meet them in person. They agreed, cautiously. We arranged to meet in a diner halfway between Latham Creek and Harrelton. I didn't sleep the night before. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The diner was one of those places suspended in time, red vinyl booths, sticky laminated menus, a bell above the door that rang every time someone entered. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a booth near the window. The waitress brought me coffee, no questions asked, like she could see the weight I was carrying. Ruth and Chester walked in just after noon. They looked older than I remembered. Not just in years, but in the kind of way people wear after secrets have lived too long inside them. Ruth wore a navy cardigan. Chester still had the same stiff posture, but the confidence that once clung to him like armor was gone. They sat across from me. No one said anything for a long moment. Then Ruth broke the silence. You look well, she said softly. I am, I replied. Thanks to Elijah. Chester shifted uncomfortably. He looked down at the table, hands clenched. I took a breath. I didn't come to punish you, I said. I've already lived with the damage. I've stitched around the holes. But I need you to hear the truth from me. Because you spent too long hiding from it. Neither of them spoke. You took a child who had already lost everything, I continued. And instead of giving him honesty, you gave him fiction. You made yourselves the heroes in a story that wasn't yours to tell. And for a long time, I believed you. I defended you. Ruth was crying now, her shoulders trembling. I don't hate you, I said. I don't think you're monsters. I think you were scared. I think you made a terrible choice, and then built your whole life around protecting that lie. Chester finally looked up. His voice was rough. We thought, if you stayed, you'd be safe. We didn't trust him. Elijah. You didn't know him, I said. You never tried. He opened his mouth, then closed it. No excuses. Maybe for the first time in his life. Ruth wiped her eyes with a napkin. I wrote you letters, she said. When you were little. I just never mailed them. I kept thinking, maybe someday you'd understand. I do, I said. But understanding isn't the same as forgiving. They both nodded. I'm rebuilding, I told them. With people who tell the truth. Who let me be whole, even if the truth is messy. Another silence fell between us, but this one wasn't sharp. It was heavy, yes, but shared. I don't think we'll ever be close again, I said finally. But I hope you'll let go of the story you've been telling yourselves. I hope you'll learn what it means to be sorry out loud. Ruth reached across the table, her hand trembling. I didn't take it. Not out of cruelty, but because I wasn't there to console her. This wasn't her moment. It was mine. I'm going home now, I said, standing. Ruth whispered, I'm proud of who you are. I paused. So am I. I walked out into the bright afternoon. The sun felt warm on my skin. The bell above the diner door rang behind me one last time. Back in Latham Creek, Elijah was waiting on the porch when I returned. He didn't ask how it went. He just handed me a glass of iced tea and patted the chair beside him. I sat down. We watched the lake shimmer in the distance. They listened, I said. That's something, he replied. A quiet breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime rang softly. I had come full circle, not to the beginning of the story, but to the point where it stopped hurting to remember. The lies no longer defined me. The silence no longer shaped me. I had reclaimed something I didn't even know I'd lost. Myself. And for the first time in my life, I was no longer anyone's secret. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.